Today on Amplified Whole Health.
I like thinking about why did we enjoy playing music when we were kids? You know, it really was playing music, right? Maybe it doesn't, when we were kids, maybe it didn't sound as good, but we enjoyed playing it. It's supposed to be an enjoyable thing. And as you know, any time something becomes a job, some of that enjoyment can go away. So it's really trying to stay focused that that doesn't happen.
Welcome to the Amplified Whole Health podcast, where personal and organizational health meet. I'm your host, Justin Collier, and my goal is to bring you insightful interviews with business owners and leaders from a variety of different industries. We'll be talking about employee development, leadership, company culture, and quality products and services, and how they drive success in business. Thanks for joining me, and let's get started. Well, thanks for joining, and today I'm joined by John Jetter, who is the conductor of the symphony as well as the director of the symphony here in Fort Smith. Is that an accurate statement?
Yeah, well, yeah, that is accurate. Music director and conductor is the title.
Okay.
Yeah. And this is my 24th season, so yeah.
24th season.
Yeah, so 24 years.
24 years you've been in this role in some form or capacity.
Yeah.
And where did you come from before this?
Well, I'm originally from Southern California, but before this, I was living in Indianapolis. And prior to that, I went to school in Indianapolis and then on the East Coast before that. But so I've kind of been and lived in Texas for a while. So I've been around a little bit, but came here, and I guess that would be not like 96, 97 season, something like that. And, I didn't know how long I would be here, and then here we are. Next year will be 25th season. So, yeah.
How do you get into this type of work?
Well, there's a lot of different ways. My way was a little different. The real short version is I was interested in music as a kid because I really liked it. Enjoyed listening to it, and I actually got into it from a friend of mine who always had music. His mom, I think, had emigrated from Europe, so there was that tradition in their house. There was always Wagner and Beethoven, and I didn't know who any of those guys were. So interestingly, I got interested as a listener first, which is unusual at a young age. And then took piano lessons, more because I wanted to kind of learn more about music, not necessarily to be a pianist, but that's kind of the piano is kind of your instrument of choice to learn about, to have a general knowledge of music and maybe composition or something. So, and I also I had a love drawing and painting, had a graphic arts background. I soloed and did everything for my pilot's license when I was 17. So I had a lot of conflicting sort of interests, or competing interests, I would say.
Sure.
But ultimately kind of went to music school, not necessarily knowing what I wanted to do in music school. I thought I might teach like at a university or something. But anyway, one thing led to another, and had a master's degree in conducting, and that was in Indianapolis, and I had a chance to work with the orchestra there, and just sort of one thing led to another. And here there was a period of time where I was a candidate for a number of music director jobs, and the one here was available, and I came and visited the orchestra. And I've been very public about, at first I was like, wow, there needs to be a lot of work that needs to be done. The orchestra was okay. Wasn't what it is now by any means artistically, but there was at the time there were a handful of board members, symphony board members, who said, look, we really want to turn the orchestra around, and if you were to come here and be our music director, I'm sure you'd get a ton of support from the community. And that's exactly really what happened.
Wow.
Yeah.
So kind of a long road, a lot of choices it sounds like you had just from interests, right? So you made the decision, hey, I'm going to end up getting into this. And I'll be honest, I don't know a lot about the symphony, and I would imagine that there's a lot of people
either.
that There's probably a lot of people out there that don't. And so maybe you could just take a moment and explain what's the difference between a symphony and an orchestra. Is there one?
Well, no, I mean, an orchestra, you could have a jazz orchestra or a wind orchestra. Symphony orchestra is that traditional woodwind, brass, percussion, string orchestra that's been around really since the time of Bach. So it's, goes back a few hundred years. And it's a great collection of music. I mean, if you go back, it's ironic. It's one of the symphony orchestra is sort of one of the pillars of, I guess you could say, Western civilization. Interestingly enough, most of the instruments are actually Middle Eastern in origin. And they developed, and of course we have this great tradition of classical music and romantic music, and that has really blossomed, particularly in the last 100 years. And I think for most people in the general public thinking about orchestral music, their connection with it is going to be film music. And that's really a huge, the motion picture industry, the films wouldn't be what they were without music, and particularly orchestral music. And you saw orchestral music in that golden era of film, 1930s, 40s, 50s, that were all huge film scores. It switched to popular music, jazz, rock in the 60s and 70s. And then, of course, John Williams brought back the full score for Star Wars. And it's been the preferred soundtrack for most films, to use a full orchestra.
Yeah.
So the other thing I would say about, for people who might not know a lot about symphony orchestra going to concerts is, yes, I know that for most of you, as soon as you hear the word symphony, it's like, I don't think so. It sounds boring. It's boring. It's a lot of, older people listening to old music, and it's not really, doesn't sound that exciting. And I totally understand that, and I think there is some truth to that, which in the sense that that's what it can be. And the sort of snobby elitist aspect is unfortunately a big part of the orchestra industry. It's been that way for a long time. It's terrible. It's reprehensible. I have to say, don't do it that way here. We've made a great effort to remember that it's about having a fun experience. It's about listening to great music. You can have fun going to the concerts. There's a lot of really cool music out there. There's a lot of classical music that's, it's kind of boring. We don't program it, And there's a lot of classical artists out there in the world that will just put you to sleep. I get it. So we don't do that. I really think and we perform a lot of music. We perform a lot of different types. Yes, we perform Beethoven and Mozart. We perform Hans Zimmer and John Williams. We've done history of rock and roll concerts, symphonic jazz concerts, blues. I think what makes orchestral music special is it's played by an orchestra, and whether it's classical or Baroque or rock or film music, the special part about it is that a symphony orchestra is playing it. It's just it's a sound that you just can't duplicate.
Yeah. I mean, it worked for Metallica. They did something with a symphony.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. There's symphonic rock, and sometimes it works better than others. A lot of times, actually, amplified like electronic music. Like I see you've got an electric guitar here. There have been a number of electric guitar concertos. Haven't quite worked yet, but it's okay.
Yeah,
it's okay.
So. All right, so you've got the symphony. How many folks are part of the symphony here?
Okay, so specific to the Fort Smith Symphony, our roster is around anywhere from like 90 to 100 musicians. We have about 20 musicians, and they're all professional, paid musicians. Yeah, we're considered a professional per-service orchestra. And there's about 20 of these musicians who live in the greater Fort Smith area. And then all the other ones come from Dallas, Oklahoma City, Tulsa, a few from Little Rock. We have people from Springfield, Missouri. We have two principal players who live in Ithaca, New York. And we've had a lot of, in previous years, we've had a lot of musicians. Our second flutist lives in Fort Wayne, Indiana now. So we fly in some of our players. And we all get together for a very limited rehearsal time and give concerts. We give about 6 to 7 performances a year that are kind of, where you're at the concert hall. And then we give a lot of educational programs, educational concerts. We have in-school programs that go there's a jazz quartet that goes into the school, string quartet. We have a electronic string quartet that does all rock and jazz. It's called Jolt, and it's electronic instruments, all electronic violins and cello and bass. So it's a very, I think, a really broad range of music that we present. I think for symphony orchestra especially.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you've got roughly like 90 plus folks that are involved in some form or fashion. They're all paid.
Yes. So
that's interesting. It was going to be a question because I didn't know how that particularly worked. And so you got these 90 folks. How do you orchestrate and communicate with these 90 folks to make a decision on music and then to move things forward?
Well, the programming is something that I do. That's one of as a music director. So, I'll decide on a season of music that I think is very varied. Also, the fact that we give a relatively limited number of concerts a year, because we're in a smaller community and a smaller budget. So one of the things we do is, I do is program over about like a 3-year cycle. So maybe 1 year might focus on a lot of larger symphonies. Maybe it might focus more on the classics. Well, then the next year, I would definitely want something different. So it might be a focus more on pop music. And then maybe the third year is a little bit more of a focus on film music. So there's the programming. And then, there's a process in place where we have this roster of musicians. They're sent their music in advance, and maybe 4 to 6 weeks before a concert, and they come together. All of our services, concerts, rehearsals are at the Arc Best Performing Arts Center, which is at the Fort Smith Convention Center. And they're all terrific professionals, so we get together for a very short time, and everyone has learned their part, and we're there together on stage, and the job there is to kind of make it all come together. And what you're really doing is people basically are playing their parts correctly, but they might play them a little differently. So if you have you've got a violin section, so in the strings, there's like a first violin section, second violin section, viola section, cello section, bass section. There's maybe 45 to 50 musicians total just there. So all the first violins, they play exactly the same music. Their part's the same. And they've all practiced, they're professionals, they know how to play the music, but invariably, if you had 12 people read an article in a newspaper and they read it out loud, you're going to get all these different inflections, sure, right? Maybe different pronunciations. So the idea is to try to get it, maybe coordinated or a little more homogeneous. And that can be done by saying something. Some of it happens, as they're listening to other people, they kind of figure it out. Oh, the cellos had the same thing that we have, and they played it this way, so we're going to do it this way. Or a lot of it, as a conductor, is just you're doing it without saying anything, because that's you're waving that baton around, right? Yeah. And there's all sorts of things you can do non-verbally to, save time, and that's just part of that process. So when the conductor's up there, it's just not. There's a little more to it than just waving that baton. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you have to have an incredible ear in order to pick up on these nuances.
Yeah. That ideally, you have one has a good ear, and I think just as important, one has to know what needs to be taken care of at any given time. Will this get better? If I say nothing, will it just get better the next time based on my players? Is this something where we need to stop? Is this something that maybe if I say something to one group, the other group kind of has the same thing, so I don't have to address maybe a lot of players?
Sure.
Or if, for example, in the woodwinds, brass, and percussion, it's one on a part. So, for example, there's 2 flute players or 3, and they play parts that are similar, but they're their own little group, so they have separate parts. So another thing that's very important is you have these people who are musicians who are creative. You also don't want to step on what they're doing. So maybe someone, you listen to how someone has maybe a big solo and determine whether that works with what everyone else is doing. You kind of have a sense of how expressive they're being. Maybe they're trying to figure out some things, but you have to be willing to, even if you have a real strong view of how maybe the solo should go, you have to decide, well, is your strong view worth maybe not letting them do exactly what they want to do? Is it maybe letting them do exactly what they want to do more important than, because as we were discussing before, again, it's this idea of bringing everyone together.
Yeah.
So, and I'm being too detailed, but that's the sort of things that can happen.
I think that's really good perspective.
So yeah, and it also depends on your situation. This year, during COVID, we can maybe talk about it. We are giving live concerts, by the way, folks. We've given 4 live performances since October. And however, due to various factors, exposure, we only have 1 rehearsal. So, that there's that practical aspect of doing what we need to do with our players just to say, okay, we've got 10 minutes on this piece. So you also, that's where the programming comes in. Don't pick a piece that takes 45 minutes to rehearse.
Yeah. So intelligent about what pieces you pick.
Yeah.
And then giving your professional people freedom and license, and then making a decision as to when you need to step in.
Sure.
To put it all together.
Exactly.
It sounds like.
Exactly. And that's a good description, but just say that was more detailed than I would think about it. It's just natural now. It's like, you just let them do. And also, I've been with these players for a long time, so I'll have an idea what.
Yeah.
Another thing too is the physicality of it. We're playing in a space, and the audience is out in the hall. So there are issues also about projection, and I don't mean just being louder, but our main goal is to be exciting for that person in row 30. And we're, X number of feet away. So sometimes we have to do things. Maybe there might be a musical gesture that sounds perfect, maybe a little crescendo, decrescendo, but, is that going to work 40 feet away? Probably not. So then we end up maybe exaggerating what sounds like an exaggeration. When we can talk about, we've made a number of really successful recordings. And when you're recording music, sometimes you really have to do things differently because there's no visual cues. So sometimes those shaping of phrases and dynamics get exaggerated a little bit. But it sounds fine. It sounds natural in a recorded context.
But you have to do things a little different when you're recording versus when you're live.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, let's talk maybe a moment about how does someone get into the symphony and get on this roster? I mean, not necessarily yours, but just in general. What's that process?
It varies. I can tell you, like for the very large orchestras, like let's say you want to join the New York Philharmonic. I mean, they would announce a violin opening. They would receive hundreds of applications, and they would send out. You would send recordings. And I don't know if it's changed, but typically you send a recording, and they don't want usually it's just an audio recording. And basically, if you're chosen, you would then go to New York, and there's a whole audition process there. They're blind auditions, they're called. So there's literally something in front of you, so they can't tell if you're male, female, any sort of ethnicity. And then if you're selected, there's usually a year or two probationary period.
Wow.
So and there's just so you just take that idea, and then as the orchestras get smaller, what we do is really unusual, and that is I sort of don't do traditional auditions as much because I've been here long enough. I joke about this, but I have a terrific spy network in our region. So if a new musician comes, I usually hear about it. And if someone has, used to play in a big orchestra and they're here maybe teaching at a university, I have a pretty good idea, And also our musicians might say, hey, there's this new person in Dallas, and, he or she would love to come and play. That said, our roster has kind of solidified a little bit more. So one of the things is we don't have really necessarily spots available. And I do have people reach out and say, hey, I have my master's degree in trumpet performance, and I love to play. And we have a list of substitute players that's really huge already. So, and I remember, we have a list of substitutes that where like everyone on the list has their DMAs and, whatever the performance is. So there's a lot of super qualified people who we'll even come and play just a concert if it's, you know, if something opens up. So, I mean, I don't want to say it's hard to get into. I don't mean it like an exclusivity thing. It's just the practicality of a limited number of concerts and who we can ask. I am happy to say that we get people just wanting to play all the time. You know, and there's a really good. I know there's talk in our region and people who play in the orchestra, and like, let's say they live in Dallas, they'll have people say in Dallas, you know, I hear, you know, they'll say something like, oh, I just played in Fort Smith, and those people say, really, how can I do that? Because the orchestra does. I think people who don't know a lot about the Fort Smith Symphony, we actually really do have a notable reputation regionally, nationally, and internationally because of the recordings that we've done. So it's really a pretty cool thing. You know, I'm just telling you, I'm not, you know, I don't have a big head about it. But my point is, normally for an orchestra in a smaller community, you wouldn't necessarily have this, all this cool stuff.
Yeah. But you've had the opportunity to build this stuff up. And so has that been always part of your strategy, or have you just found opportunity as you've been doing this for 24 years and then taken the chance?
It's usually been, I'm a planner. Okay. So, that's another thing for people who play. They're kind of like, he's always really, he's always really organized, and I like things. The joke is, if I send someone an email about some availability, they have like 5 minutes to respond. Like, I didn't respond to the guy in 5 minutes because I'm really, I try to keep things. Well, I just like to have a plan and follow through. So yes, there's long range planning, and I think the main issue has been that all of the artistic planning has always included the financial part. So I don't think I've ever gone to our board of directors and said, hey, I think this would be a great project to do. This would be a great artistic project. And then sit back. I'll say, I think we should do this project, and I believe we can raise the money doing this, asking this person or asking this industry. So I think that has led to actually us being able to do a lot of things instead of just having a lot of ideas. Yeah, I thought about doing that, but we couldn't do it, So you've been very detailed, not only in your ideas, but also how are you going to execute on them? Yeah, I think it's really important. And I think in the creative world, if I can say, I think that's one of the creative people, artists, if you will, that's one of their biggest downfalls, is they're so wrapped up in the creation. Part of creating something is, for lack of a better word, selling it. So if you create it and no one partakes in it, I think it was a waste of time. Or if you design a new car, well, if no one buys the car, right? Yeah. So I think now in this day and age, I think that's starting to be understood a little bit more, that there is, music's great, the theater's great, but there's the business side of it, and that has to be part of it, or else otherwise it's a hobby. Yeah, exactly. And there's nothing wrong with a hobby. There's nothing wrong with it, but and I have to say, I've really enjoyed the other part of it too. It's been nice to go to, for example, funding a project. I've really enjoyed a lot of aspects of that. Is here's a project, and talking to people about it, seeing if they, are interested in doing it, being a part of their generosity. The fact that they're saying, yes, I'll be a sponsor, is great. How do you go about a fundraising campaign for something? What does that typically look like? And who does that involve? It involves our board and staff, and in addition, and I'm music director and conductor, and about 10 or 11 years ago, I was made the executive director of the orchestra, so I'm also technically the administrative head of the orchestra. Typically, those are two separate people. There's a whole story there, and then about 3 years ago or 4 years ago, it's like, well, why don't you be the development director also? So the fundraising is kind of an all-on-deck effort, and we do it primarily through sponsorships. A lot of nonprofits do sponsorships. A lot of nonprofits do special events. There might be a big gala or something like that. We've done that a little bit, but our main support has been through corporate sponsorships, individual sponsorships. We have different levels of sponsorship within the orchestra. So you could be a concert sponsor or a co-sponsor or a guest artist sponsor. You can also sponsor a musician in the orchestra. There's chair sponsorship, which is really popular, and there's a conductor circle level. And then we have a lot of people who sponsor our educational programs, and we do a good job at recognition. And I really enjoy, as much as possible, talking to people about it. And if they're interested in sponsoring, I want to hear, if they have questions about it. What do they, sponsors, what do they want to get out of it? Not necessarily in terms of marketing, although that's fine, but what do they want to see with this project?
Yeah. Huh. Well, you mentioned that you've done now 4 concerts, I think, since October. Throughout the course of COVID, you were doing concerts, and there was a lot of symphonies that didn't.
Yeah.
What was different for you?
Well, some lucky things. For one thing, we live in a state where not everything was shut down, and I think people have different views on that, maybe.
Sure.
But that gave us an opportunity. I'm also, this sounds silly, but I think I'd mentioned earlier, I love to read, and I like reading about like astronauts and fighter pilots and explorers and scientists and all that. And it just seems like that people, human beings, can kind of do anything if they put their mind to it. And it was just a cliche, but when COVID first happened, actually, I was in Europe when it happened, and I basically I came back in the first flight where they just started, the CDC just started like cracking down on, what you had to do when you get off the plane.
Sure.
But so there was a period of time where we just waited. And then it was like, okay, there's probably going to be some way that we could do this. And we know there's going to be a lot. So we reached out to the Arkansas Department of Health, and our concerts would be considered these large events. And we just basically looked at every aspect of how we do a concert, and then, okay, what's going to happen? How is it an option with COVID? We have quite a bit of flexibility in terms of the size of orchestra that we could use. There was a lot of options in terms of health protocols. I mean, we had to follow a bunch. I think for indoor concerts, something that not even the convention center people realized was that I went down, or I think I called them and said, okay, we need to. The key with giving indoor events in COVID, more than anything else, is fresh air. You got to have fresh air. So, what is your ACH rate for the concert hall? What's the maximum air change rate per hour? And the way the concert hall is set up here is, they have these really robust fan systems and air conditioning, and it's not really ever designed to be like all these units full blast. It's just not designed it well. If you do that, there's calculations and looking at what the manufacturer suggested, cubic feet of air will move, and basically it has an incredible air change rate per hour in there. It's pretty much fresh air, every 4, 5, 6 minutes, the whole thing. And it's not recirculated air. It comes in from blowers and it goes out through a very robust exhaust fan system that I don't know exactly why they had it. It might have been the exhaust fan system, might have been something for like if there were any fires, or I don't know I don't quite know, but we just got really lucky. And when you're at the concert, you really don't notice it, except when you walk in through the side hallways to get into the concert hall. There are these narrow hallways, and you're in a wind tunnel there because all the winds, it's kind of the suction from the main auditorium.
Yeah.
So that was hugely helpful. We limited our audience size, did all that stuff. We built plexiglass shields in front of all the wind players. The health requirements of everyone wearing a mask, the social distancing. Wind players even wear a mask. They've got a little slit cut here to play. They do, yeah. And limiting the concert times. We're currently, instead of giving a concert, we give 2 shorter concerts. We repeat it. There's time in the middle for the whole hall to be disinfected. So it's just a huge list of things. And, a shout out to some of our board members who are medical professionals. and they were the best people. And to be able to sit down, and it's like, very picky doctors and nurses who really, and one of whom is very involved in COVID treatment currently, just seeing people. And it was wasn't necessarily, well, let's try to convince these people, but it's like if they felt comfortable doing it, then I think that was a pretty good, indication that we could try it. So our first concerts were done outdoors, which those were concerts on the grounds of the Marshals Museum. Protocols for indoor and outdoor performances are very similar. So let's try the first one outdoors, the first thing. And we use so much of that indoors. And we have, at the time of this recording, we've got actually 4 performances in about maybe 5 weeks that are coming up. So that'll be in, and we feel like these, parameters. Again, it's all been approved by the Department of Health.
Yeah.
So.
But I think that's really a wonderful story that you took the time to figure out how do we work, or not around the system, but how do we work within the system?
Yeah, well,
within the constraints we've been given.
Yeah, exactly. And obviously, really feeling like, is this a safe option? It's got to be a safe option, and we feel really confident about it. Sure, I guess it's safer if you sat home in your in a room, right? Yeah. But our take is, we have to have some balance. We have to have some normal something, and a lot of the sponsors felt very strongly about, we can't shut the city down. We've got to keep moving. So this has worked. And I think, so we had a lot of good, just a good set of circumstances. A lot of the larger orchestras, they're completely shut down. Actually, most orchestras are shut down. Mm-hmm. I think some of them do have issues, like if you're a smaller orchestra, like ours, in terms of the season, throughout the country, there are many. There's about 1,300 orchestras in the United States. It's a lot. Wow. A lot of the smaller ones perform like on university campuses. They'll use their auditorium. Well, so many universities across the country, their auditoriums are closed. Sure. So, and if you're an orchestra, and let's say you want to use a local church, well, a lot of the churches aren't really, just as an example. Yeah. So there's venue issues, a lot of financial challenges with a lot of those orchestras, that they just can't afford to do it. Mm-hmm. And I can't imagine, an organization like the Met, an opera company right now, because singing is a no-no. Especially if you think about an operatic singer, they're just like, they're belting it out there, and there's all this spray, right? I don't know when that's going to come back to normal. Yeah.
But you've been fortunate to be able to continue to do
so far
what you love to do.
I'm knocking, you can hear it. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
So what maybe have you learned from the process of having to shift and to pivot over the last, let's just call it 12 months?
It's been, of course, it's scary, because you don't know what the long-term or short-term ramifications are for safety, just financially for arts organizations. It's certainly scary, but there have been some real interesting things about just kind of it gives you a chance. It's given us the chance, forced us to really kind of reevaluate literally everything, from handing out concert programs. We can't do that now. We had started the year previously having an option to where you could have the concert program on your phone, and we're just doing that exclusively, and people really like it. We learned, we're doing these shorter concerts. We used to do an intermission and have an intermission reception and all that, and we found, I think, a majority of our audiences don't want an intermission. They want a 70, 75, 80-minute concert, maybe a little longer, and that's it. So we've learned some practical things. I've learned to just, it's in the classical music world, we spend a lot of time on details. I'd say the environment in general, there's kind of picky people who want things. I have good players who they're super nice people, but I know there's a lot of, people being particular, and sure. The temperature's got to be just right, and the lighting's just got to be right, and everything's just got to be, these little things. And right now it's, okay, you can play or you cannot play, kind of a thing. Yeah. And some of the I don't know. It's made it more real. It's more basic in some ways. And I'm kind of hoping is that after, when things get back to normal, maybe our industry will just, chill a little bit.
Yeah.
And I mean, listen, I love music. It's just, the arts industries, there's great people, but I guess it's like anything else. I was talking to someone the other day who was an engineer and just talking about, get a group of engineers in a room, they're all going to be, one-upping each other. I guess it's just the way it is, but you have that in the arts, and I'm hoping maybe this will, people learn from it.
Yeah.
So.
Well, let's come back to the people for just a moment and employee development. I mean, they're paid professionals. Mm-hmm. They're employees, if you will.
Yeah, and we do have full-time staff. We do have a business manager and a stage manager, technical assistant. So there are So you have employees that are there full-time, and then you have these folks that come in and play performances. So let's start with the folks then that are part of doing the performances. What's their professional development? Is that part of what you do, or is that something that they do on their own? Their professional development. Well, these people are the performers, quite a few of them. That's what they do all the time. Mm-hmm. They're maybe playing in a number of different orchestras. We have a number of university teachers, people who have their doctorates in music, and they're performing, and as part of what they do. We have public school orchestra teachers who have bachelor's, masters in music education, who've had a performing, element, and they're all doing, of course, their own sort of courses of development. I think when they come to perform with us, we're putting these programs together, kind of our way, which is where we have our own version, I guess, of osmosis, of taking maybe sort of a limited amount of time. And I think, again, I like to have an orchestra that, again, really projects out to an audience. And you'd think, well, every orchestra's that way. That's a real big priority for me. Mm-hmm. So I think when they perform, when they come and play in the Fort Smith Symphony, there's going to be a certain style approach that they're going to use, and they might not use it if they're playing in another orchestra. There might be a different dynamic. So there's that flexibility that they need to do that without a speech beforehand. And they just, or maybe I'll just do something and they'll know, there'll be some indication, this needs to happen, or this is the kind of sound, or to make a few, general comments about a lot of conductors, a lot of orchestras. The way it sounds on stage, of course, everyone's playing. The way you play, if you're playing in a practice room, the way it is on stage, that's a number one priority, because the idea is if it sounds great here, it's going to sound great in the hall. Not necessarily. I mean, yes, but there's a kind of a different approach to really projecting. So there's that whole stylistic thing that I think we try to do. So, for lack of a better term, our orchestra tends to sound really big, not loud, just big. It's a big sound. It can be loud sometimes. It can be loud sometimes when needed, but that's a style that they do, and they keep when they play with us. There's that approach. Mm-hmm. When they play in another orchestra, it might be very different. And musicians nowadays, to hint at what we were talking about earlier, they're performing. Everyone's doing some teaching, and everyone's learning more about technology and trying to incorporate that. There's a little bit more of maybe the marketing, online lessons, even before COVID. Yeah. There's that aspect that's becoming a bigger part of it, mm-hmm. of being a professional musician.
Yeah. Well, and how about your employees? You mentioned you've got several, I think it was 3?
Well, there's 3. There's usually been 4 full-time employees with the symphony. So there's me, and my job is usually a 2 or 3 person. There's a music director, an executive director, and then maybe a development director. Well, I guess I'm a bargain, so there's that. We have a business manager who started with us recently, and that person manages all the day-to-day finances, billing, does things like our audit, gets all that materials. We get a yearly audit done. was just involved in our PPP loan application for the second time. It helps me a little bit with grants. And this particular person has a music background, which is great. Person previous had a similar job, had been there for 20 years. And then we have another person who's that's stage managing and basically manages all of our IT stuff. So those folks, those jobs, we have had an office, it's small staff, and the people have generally worked very independently, and I'm sort of gently suggesting things, Yeah. But we've always tried to have real self-starter employees, because I think with a small office like that, there's so many different things. You have to just be flexible and be able to jump in and help no matter what it is. There's been a lot of cross-training, and it's kind of an all-hands-on-deck situation, mentality. Yeah, really.
Well, and you just mentioned the person prior to that position had been there for 20 years. You've been there for 24 years. What about it draws folks to stay so long?
Well, it's a very unique thing, And Becky Yates, if I can say, she was with us for 20 years, and she loved being involved in, presenting music, And those people who aren't performing, or who are doing, maybe you could say behind the scenes, they're just as involved in it. I mean, it's just as important. Lakin Emerson is there and has this new role now, and as a performer, she knows that really well about it. It's part of a huge project, and after a concert, and even the selling the tickets, doing all the logistical things, that's all part of it. And I think people just love it. And there are a lot of great jobs out there, but it is also kind of unique to do this. It's very unlike a more working like in a large company, or like I guess you could say a corporate America type of position. And those are great, but this is very it's not like being self-employed exactly, but it kind of has that feel a lot of times.
There's a lot of autonomy, it sounds like.
Exactly. And Tony Yates is our stage manager and IT person. And then we have, we do answer to our board of directors, and we're a nonprofit organization. So we have a board of directors of between 20 and 24 members. And depending on the nonprofit, boards are involved in different ways. And we very much had a board that has respected, I think, the staff's abilities and the musicians' abilities. They've kind of let us do our thing, and they're more of keeping tabs on what we're doing as opposed to maybe telling us what to do. However, what's been terrific is they've been much more involved under the current circumstances with COVID, and they've been great sounding boards. And we want board members. We wanted those medical professionals to really be picky in terms of like putting concerts together. Yeah. And because at first it was, well, I don't know if we're going to be able to do this at all, and to go from there to what's happening now it's been really terrific.
Yeah, you're putting on concerts.
Yeah.
And a lot of folks aren't.
Yeah. And I mean, we don't have gigantic audiences. We have to limit it.
Yeah.
And a lot of audience members are still hesitant, which we totally understand. We do, related to that is starting with our last concert and with a majority of the concerts for the rest of the year and maybe next, we do a live stream of the second performance. But we offer that as an extension of the ticket. So we don't offer it separately.
Sure.
But, if people maybe just aren't comfortable yet, we totally understand that. It's very, very understandable.
Yeah. Well, let's maybe talk about culture for just a moment.
Sure.
It sounds like you've created a pretty neat culture and unique culture at your time with the symphony. And so I'm just curious, what strategies did you put in place to create that culture?
Well, I wanted to have the orchestra run in a very professional and efficient manner. I mean, really try to just, in some ways, have it run like a large symphony orchestra, but with a lot less. I don't want to say, I don't know what the word is. A lot less regimentation. It's funny. It's like two opposite things. Like have it run really well, but have people feel like they have a lot of flexibility and they can contribute and have an open dialogue. So if someone has an issue or someone has a problem with something, they can immediately come to talk to me. If I'm the issue, you can talk to the board president. There were not a lot of hierarchies, just feeling like we were colleagues. And I think always feeling like people had a say, could chime in. I think we've had a really great history of maybe if someone makes a suggestion that we do it. Or if there's an issue maybe with, with a number of people or something that we could do better for a number of people. It doesn't take a number of people to say that for us to act on it. It's maybe just one or two people. And I know over the years we've had that happen a lot of times. Someone might say, well, can you maybe work on X, Y, Z, and then at the next concert is done, it's taken care of. And they're just, very surprised at that. So it's getting things done quickly. I think it's creating, without it being cheesy, of course, really having it being a positive and enjoyable atmosphere. In terms of the symphony, I like thinking about why did we enjoy playing music when we were kids? It really was playing music, right? Maybe it doesn't, when we were kids, maybe it didn't sound as good, but we enjoyed playing it. It's supposed to be an enjoyable thing. And as you know, any time something becomes a job, some of that enjoyment can go away. So it's really trying to stay focused that doesn't happen. And one of the reasons we've had a lot of success, and one of the reasons we have so many people who want to come and play here, is everyone hears that it's really a fun time to come and play. And unfortunately, our business, the symphony business isn't that way. And one of the saddest things is when musicians come to play and I get a chance to talk to them, they'll often talk about some recent experience they've had with another orchestra. And I just, I can't believe it. I'm not saying there aren't good experiences out there, but so frequently it's people just taking themselves way too seriously, and there's so much negativity. And, you're doing music. I mean, you're playing great music. Why? And that is in our broader orchestra industry, it's really a pretty serious problem, I think. And I think going back to one of the first things we said about some people thinking maybe the concerts might be, if they heard symphony or maybe they went to a concert and they thought, oh, that was kind of boring. If you don't have if you have a bunch of people on stage who aren't very happy, or who are looking at it like a job, it's only going to be so good.
Yeah.
And it's an emotional experience. So if that emotion's not coming out, it's, it's like the gazillionth performance of a play, where everyone's kind of tired of.
We've done that line.
Yeah, going through the motions.
Yeah.
So try to keep it fresh all the time. And I talk a lot, just I interact a lot with the musicians because I am wanting to know how they're doing. When COVID started, I called everyone in the orchestra over about a 3-week period just to make sure everyone was doing okay, how it was going for them financially, without asking too many details, just checking in and seeing, if there were any real significant issues, maybe if there was something that we could, do, try to maybe get them a few more gigs or something, just something like that.
Yeah.
So it's just having that kind of, thinking about other people. And it's been a challenge because, again, our industry, people are going to watch this and think, oh my God, he really doesn't like, he doesn't like his industry. Yeah, I kind of don't. I remember years ago, I went to a national conference for orchestras, and they have these every year. There's a big national organization, and Garrison Keillor was the keynote speaker, Prairie Home Companion, and he got up there and he was talking, and he said a couple things, and he says, well, you guys are, you're all a bunch of snobs, and everyone kind of got like this. And I was sitting in the back thinking, he's absolutely right. It's great music, maybe because it means there's so much art to it. People just have taken it to themselves to be the presenters of this great art. which is they do, but it's got to be done in a way that's, don't take it so serious. Take it seriously, but it's a living, breathing thing. You don't see, like in the pop music world, you don't see that as much, Yeah. People just do it. And I guess you could say, well, you could get into, comparing the Rolling Stones to Beethoven, which is stupid. But there's just, I think that's just part of the openness of the arts and, the fine arts. I think that's been one of the fine arts downfalls. Is we're so important, and I think young people, it's a challenge sometimes for young people to get into classical music. Young people really pick up on that, don't they? I mean, they really, if someone's not genuine, or if someone kind of has a chip on their shoulder, even without saying it, boy, young folks just, man, you can't.
Creates a barrier to entry.
Yeah. And it's such a cool thing, right? Beethoven, there's some really cool Beethoven. There's some really cool Mozart. There's some Mozart that's really boring, so you don't play that stuff. He wrote music. He started writing music when he was 6. It's incredible. Well, the stuff that he wrote when he was 6, it's a nice historical thing. Maybe don't play it. Yeah. It's really, at the end of the day, it's really, if you think about it, it's not that hard to try to make people feel valued and have a good experience, making sure, be really appreciative of everything that people do for you. Why do we not do that so much?
That's a good question.
I
don't know the answer to it. We get wrapped up and lost in our own thing, and
and I understand, and you're work and family, I get it, but it's a problem.
Yeah. There's an opportunity to have a little bit more relationship.
Yeah. And where we are in this country, my gosh, we have it so good in so many ways. If you get a chance to travel, I'm not saying there aren't cool things in other parts of the world, but just so many people struggle, and I mean, it's easy to forget that.
For sure. Yeah. I think it's a good way to maybe wrap up, which is take a step back.
Yeah.
And look at somebody else and recognize where they're at.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, I guess maybe one final question I would have for you, which is, if people are curious about the symphony, where do they go? How do they look it up? What's the process?
Well, we do have a website.
All right.
Yeah, fortsmithsymphony.org. We have depending on the time of year, a pretty active Facebook page as we get closer to concerts. And, I would, for people listening, watching, I think I understand all the, maybe some prejudice if you haven't been, but I have to say, when people come to the concerts, they love it. Generally, they're everywhere from incredibly well attended to sold out. We do, over the last 20 years, we've sold out most every concert. There's definitely a demand. But I do know that there are folks that kind of go, and I don't know how many times over the years, someone has said, I finally was able to drag my husband to the concert and we both loved it. I hear that so many times. Or people who say, I lived in Fort Smith for 25 years and I'm so mad because I finally went to the symphony. What was I thinking to have waited this long? And I hear a lot of that because it's a very, the professional standard is actually really high. I mean, the orchestra plays really well. I think people will be really surprised if they're thinking in a smaller community. We've had people move here from big cities who attended, big orchestras on a regular basis. They're real happy. Something we, alluded to is some of these recording projects that we've done. I mean, we've been, we're up there being compared with all the major orchestras, and it's getting good reviews, and we're just fortunate we've had this sort of growth, development, support, and it's here in town. Now, with all of this said, this particular year is a challenge because of COVID, and actually what's happened is because of strong subscription sales combined with the parameters, restrictions for social distancing, we're kind of sold out for the year. Like, we just don't have room to accommodate anyone for health reasons, unless those people who have season tickets decide that they might not use it for a specific concert. And we do have a whole process to try to determine that. So Towards the end of the season, we might be able to offer some tickets for certain concerts. And we hope next year that if things start to improve, which they probably will, probably slower than people maybe want, we can start to go back to normal. And we actually have all next year is all planned, and all the programs are in place, because I like to be organized.
Because you're organized 3 years in advance.
Yeah, and it's kind of the next step. It's assuming that there will be some COVID issues still. Maybe we don't have to sit 6 feet apart. Maybe we can sit 3 feet apart. Maybe we could take our masks off when we play or something. We're sort of, it's kind of the season looks a little bit more like it normally does.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's awesome. Well, John, I just want to say thank you.
Sure. Thank you.
Show and telling me all about the symphony, and I learned a lot, and
thank
hopefully others did as well. So thanks for your time. I really appreciate it, and that's that.
Thank you.
I'm grateful you chose to listen. Please help us out by following, liking, or subscribing to our content at Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. Take care and have a blessed day.